This is an NBC News special report. Here's Hallie Jackson.
Good day. We are coming on the air with breaking news and a potentially huge breakthrough in the war between Israel with Hamas. NBC News has just confirmed moments ago that Hamas has released 2 American hostages. Again, 2 American hostages who had been captured during that Hamas terror attack inside Israel more than 2 weeks ago. That's according to multiple sources. The news coming about just an hour or so after a senior Hamas official told NBC News that they would release the hostages if Israel stopped bombing Gaza. That is the territory controlled by Hamas. The State Department has said that Americans are believed to be among those kidnapped, although it is not clear at this point, again, where things stand with the larger group of hostages who have been taken. I want to bring in NBC News foreign correspondent Josh Letterman, who is live for us in Israel in the region. Josh, what do we know?
Well, Hallie, we are hearing from 3 sources with knowledge of this release who have confirmed to Richard Engel, Tom Winter, and myself that these 2 U.S. citizens have now been released by Hamas. Now, we want to be very clear about what we don't know right now, namely the identities of these people. We also don't know where they are, whether they are still in the Gaza Strip, whether they would have been moved into Israel, into Egypt, potentially under the care of the Red Cross. And that is a major open question right now, but we do know that Hamas is describing these 2 U.S. citizens as a mother and a daughter. Now, the remainder of our sources, we have not yet been able to pin down those identities, but this release, if we get more information about exactly who they are, would be the first hostages known to have been released since the beginning of this crisis 2 weeks ago. And it comes after earlier today we heard from Israel's military confirming that not only do they believe there are about 200 people who are held hostage in the Gaza Strip, but that they believed that most of them were alive. That had been a big open question since the start of this, whether those hostages were alive or whether some or all of them might already be dead. But Israel's military leaving some hope for the successful return of those hostages, as they said that they do believe the majority of them are alive, Hallie.
Josh, do we know anything at this point about the potential of family notification now to the loved ones of these people who we believe have been released?
Well, that would certainly be the first step that the U.S. government would want to make before it would say anything publicly. At this hour, we are awaiting a State Department briefing that was scheduled to take place right around now. If the U.S. government is in a position where they have done family notification and are able to make anything public to the rest of us, that would likely be the place where we would first hear that from the government. But so far, there has been no official comment from the U.S. government. We have reached out to the Israeli government, of course, to see if they have any information that they can share as well, and we'll bring those details to you as soon as we get them. But for right now, the U.S., the Israeli side have been very quiet about this, in part because, remember, even if these 2 Americans are now somewhere safe, there are still nearly 200 hostages, including some Americans, who are believed to still be hostage in the Gaza Strip. And the big focus right now will be on making sure that any efforts to bring additional people home safely are not derailed, Hallie.
Josh, thank you. I'm going to ask you to stand by for us. I want to bring in our Raf Sanchez, who's been reporting from Israel since the start of this war. And Raf, since nearly the minute after that Hamas terror attack about 2 weeks ago that began this war, there had been an intense diplomatic scramble to try to get some of these hostages released. Talk to us about where those discussions stand and specifically the role of the Qataris here.
Yeah, well, Hallie, the Hamas's so-called military wing says this deal to apparently release 2 American citizens came about after Qatari mediation. We know the Qataris have been involved from a very early hour in this. They provide a lot of the money, a lot of the humanitarian funding that has kept Gaza going over the last couple of years. They have direct lines of contact with senior Hamas officials far beyond what many other governments have. And they are the people who the Americans, who the Europeans, who the Israelis often turn to when they have messages that they need to deliver to Hamas and when they have answers that they need to hear back. Now, this claim that 2 Americans were released was made by the spokesman of the so-called military wing of Hamas. He has been the source of what little we know about the hostages being held in Gaza. He goes by the name Abu Obaida. That is not his real name. He tends to appear either masked in video videos or he releases voice statements. And this was a highly choreographed production, Hallie. At about 7:30 local time here, the sun had gone down, Shabbat had begun in Israel. Hamas put out a statement saying that they were about to reveal important news. And just about 7 minutes later, simultaneously in both English and Arabic, they said that they were releasing this American mother, this American daughter, for what they say are humanitarian reasons. And they framed this, Hallie, as a rebuke of the statements that President Biden made when he was in Israel earlier in the week, condemning Hamas as a terrorist organization. They claim that they are doing this to send a message to the American people that President Biden's claims were not true. Hallie.
The president, of course, reiterating that condemnation of Hamas in that rare primetime Oval Office address to the nation just last night. Raf, thank you. I want to bring in our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who has been covering this on the ground in Israel. Richard, you are among the tip of the spears for the reporting effort here. Tell us more about what we're learning and where this is headed.
So NBC News can confirm that 2 Americans have been released by Hamas. That follows this statement from Hamas saying that it was releasing or did release an American mother and daughter for humanitarian reasons. We can confirm from 3 independent sources from multiple reporters at NBC News that these 2 Americans are free. It is a major development, and I was also told by a senior negotiator directly involved in this process that, quote, hopefully this is just the start.
Yeah. Well, that's the question here, Richard, is does this perhaps indicate that this could be the beginning of the dam breaking and the potential for the release of more hostages in the days to come?
That is the goal. That is what the negotiators are working on, that this would be the start. That was what I was told directly. This is just the start, hopefully. And it also follows an important statement by the Israeli military earlier today. The Israeli military said, and the Israeli military has been extremely closed-lipped about this for obvious reasons, that there are 200 hostages, about 200 hostages. There are still an unknown number of missing people being held in Gaza, and that most of them are alive. The Israeli military also said that 20 of those hostages are under 18 and that 10 to 20 are over 60. So if you look at the sequence of events here, it does indicate that there is movement on this issue. You have the Israelis giving an extraordinary level of detail, so it seems that they must have been given proof of life in order to come out and say that they believe that most of the hostages are still alive and to give a breakdown of their ages. Then you have this choreographed release by Hamas saying that it has done it. And then just in the last few minutes, 3 independent sources confirming to NBC News that 2 Americans have been released.
What does this mean, Richard, for the potential for any further movement as it relates to a ground attack by Israel into Gaza? Because as you reported earlier in the week, one of the conditions that Hamas had put on any release potentially of hostages, even before this, was essentially a ceasefire.
So we've been following this directly quite closely for the last several days. And yes, I spoke with a senior Hamas official a few days ago, and he made this offer on our air, saying that Hamas is willing to release all civilians, including Israelis, is willing to release all foreigners held by Hamas. That would include dual nationals, if the airstrikes are stopped. Now, this release today seems to have happened while under fire. The airstrikes have not stopped. So I do not know if Hamas has changed position. Perhaps that is why only 2 people have been released for, quote, humanitarian reasons. These negotiations are being held in secret, but it does seem very clearly now, with 3 sources telling NBC News that these 2 Americans have been freed, that there is movement in a clearly positive direction for the families of these hostages and potentially for the course of this war. There are still many thousands, tens of thousands of Israeli troops positioned around Gaza, poised for an invasion. I do not know if this slows down that invasion, but if there is progress being made, it is something that negotiators will want to and do want to pursue. Because as I said, this this Arab negotiator who's directly involved in these talks told me, hopefully, this is just the start.
Do you have any understanding yet, Richard, or do we have any sense yet of how Hamas is looking at the foreign nationals that are believed to have been kidnapped and abducted out of Israel versus Israeli citizens, and whether there might be any sort of weight given to either one of those categories here in the release of hostages moving forward?
So what Hamas is saying publicly and what ends up happening in the course of negotiations may be two different things. But what Hamas has said publicly is that the Israeli soldiers will not be released, that the Israeli soldiers would only be released under very extreme conditions, that they would be released if Israel releases all Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. But they said that Israeli civilians, and foreigners, that is, Israelis with foreign passports, that they could be released immediately when the time is right. That is what they have said in the past. And now, under fire, Hamas says for humanitarian reasons, it has released these two Americans, as confirmed by three sources.
Richard Engel, thank you so much. I'm going to ask you to stand by for just a moment because I want to bring in now Martin Fletcher, who is an author, of course, a former NBC News correspondent and our former Tel Aviv bureau chief. Martin, we are so glad to have you here. You have shared publicly now over the course of the last 24 hours that two members of your wife's family have been among those taken hostage. Here we are now, reporting here, as confirmed by NBC News based on multiple sources, that two Americans have been released, according to Hamas, a mother and daughter. Can you give us any insight into anything you may have heard, any kind of potential sense of hope among your family?
Well, I've just heard literally 30 seconds ago, Hallie, that they have not received any information yet from anybody. But of course, the family is hopeful and praying because they are Americans. My family, they're American citizens. They are a mother and daughter. As far as we know, they're the only American mother and daughter who've been kidnapped and held hostage. So obviously we're hoping this is them. It would be a miracle for the family. And hopefully it's the beginning of something larger. You know, the question then now becomes, what did Israel give to get them out? And Israel holds 30 female security prisoners, Palestinian security prisoners in its jails, and about 150 minors, young people. And there's been talk in the early on about a possible prisoner swap, Hamas letting the women and children go in return for the women and children in Israel's jails, the security prisoners. So maybe that's going to be the next step, a larger prisoner exchange. So for this family, for my family, of course, everyone's praying that our particular tragedy potentially could be over. But I have to say one thing, it's not the end of it for this family, even if it is my relatives who've been released. My cousin, who's been giving me the information, was at a funeral this morning for another cousin who was killed. And his wife, another member of my family, which I didn't even know about, is also held hostage in Gaza. So there's 2 out, 1 to go for our family if this is the case. So this is a tragedy with just one family out of many praying and hoping.
It speaks to the nightmare that so many families, Martin, are living at this moment after their loved ones had been taken by Hamas in that terror attack now nearly 2 weeks ago. Martin, can you help us understand? I know you only recently found out, I think it was just within the last day, that these family members had indeed been abducted. Do you know how it happened? Do you know the conditions under which they were taken?
Yeah, they were on kibbutz Nahal Oz, right in the south of Gaza. It's one of those kibbutzim where there was no help from the army or the police for many hours. And this is a young couple, a mother and daughter rather, visiting from Evanston, Illinois. They're Americans. They were visiting their grandmother on the kibbutz. It was her 85th birthday, and the attack suddenly happened, and people were killed and running and racing. And the last that my two family members were seen was hands tied and being dragged away towards Gaza by the terrorists. So that's the last anybody heard of them. And now there's this news that maybe they're the mother and daughter who have been released. I mean, what a miracle for one family, and many more families waiting for similar miracles. I don't want to emphasize how happy we are before it happens, because I know so many other people are still suffering bitterly.